working with client defenses. What might we see, Rory, to understand that a client has got defenses up?
Well, I think I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes, Ken, from John Schleen, who was one of Carl Rogers' students who went on to write a massive body of work in its own right. And he wrote his principles of therapy. And one of the principles was, he said, everyone knows everything. We may have denials, cover-ups, overloads, lapses of memory, but we are the ultimate source. And within that deeply phenomenological statement is a universal truth that at the heart of everything, unless someone is seriously mentally unwell or is under the influence of drugs or alcohol or something that alters the mind dramatically, we all know what the truth is. We all know our truths. And sometimes we defend ourselves against looking at them. What I'd say to people is that sometimes we work with clients and it's quite obvious that there's something they want to talk about or something they want to change, but they don't want to. How do we work with that? Do we challenge them? Do we wait? It can be so tricky, Ken, can't it? It can be so tricky.
It can, and I worked for some time specializing in drugs and alcohol, and there we see it so often where somebody would present for treatment, and they would do so because of how their life looked at that time, the pain that they were feeling in their life, maybe the pain that they were causing others. And they would see that very, very clearly. Would they see what was going on and how life was falling apart for them and the troubles that they were facing? That was what presented them at therapy in the first place. But when presented with what they would need to go through, the self-concept that they would need to challenge to overcome that, it was interesting to see. And I guess this is why the recovery rates are so low in alcohol and drug abuse, is there was a massive resistance. There was a backing away. I want the results. I want this to go away. I want to feel better, but I'm struggling to challenge myself. I'm struggling to actually face up to that I know. And those are the defenses, and they shoot up. And once those defenses do go up, it can be like just hitting against a brick wall, I guess, in some cases. And of course, I'm speaking specifically about that very specific drugs and alcohol there.
Yeah, that particular client group, but it is universal, Ken. I think with a lot of clients, and you never guess who helps us out with this. Uncle Carl Rogers, he helps us out. And this is where the 19 propositions really come to the fore. I know that people say, the 19 propositions, they drive me absolutely crazy, if I can use that on the podcast for mental health, but yeah, drive me absolutely crazy. But there are two propositions that are really, really helpful. And remember, the 19 propositions are Rogers' theory of human personality and how it can change. So that's a good quote for your assignments. But there's two, there's 15 and 16. And I paraphrase. In 15, it says that the more people are kind of stuck, the more rigidly they'll hold on to the self-concept. Yeah. In other words, they become more defensive if they're overtly challenged. However, Proposition 16 goes on to say, in the absence of threat, clients can change. Again, I paraphrase. So in other words, if you're offering the core conditions, or those three facilitative conditions of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard, and certainly UPR, being non-judgmental, it is possible, and we see it through the arc of therapy, that clients become less defensive. They're more open to sharing those things that are very difficult for them to change, and look at them and examine them in the therapy room. And as such, change occurs. It connects into another one of Rogers. When I accept myself as I can learn and change. He had it covered in every way, didn't he, Ken?
He did. It's one of my favorite quotes, that when I truly accept myself as I am, do I have the ability to move, to change, to move from where I am at? And it's interesting because the key concept there is the self-acceptance, the seeing it in self and accepting it. Because I guess part of the defense structure is a non-acceptance of that part of self. We can have parts of self, and when we study to be counselors, psychotherapists, we're encouraged to look at self. And every now and again, I know I certainly found some things within self that I couldn't accept. I couldn't accept that I was that way. It was I just couldn't accept it. There it is. And without acceptance of it, there's no way of moving past that. If you look at Rogers's theory, that's what he's saying there. Only when I truly accept that this is how I am, do I have any ability to change. It's almost a paradox. In fact, he starts that quote by saying the curious paradox is.
It is.
If I remember correctly. So it's that acceptance. And you spoke about the 19 propositions, and you spoke about that threat-free environment. I love those words, threat-free environment. And Rogers gives us a recipe for creating a threat-free environment, and it is called his 6 necessary and sufficient conditions. If we use our facilitative conditions, the empathy, the unconditional positive regard, and I can't believe I'm forgetting the third of the
congruence.
Thank you, and congruence. Good job. I'm not on writing an assignment right now. That is providing that threat-free environment, that threat-free, I'm not judged. I can bring myself as I am. And there's a fellow human being here who's fully accepting of that. And it challenges the incongruence of, but I'm not fully accepting of that part of self. But here is a fellow human being who is unconditionally accepting me as I am. And that creates that threat-free environment. And this all ties in because we are covering the key concepts in person-centered therapy as our last topic on this podcast. 19 propositions, Rory very wisely brought in there. And Rogers also discusses it in the 7 stages of process, where we move from that rigidity, that stuck, that defending our actions and blaming it maybe on others, to going through to being that more fully functioning person, acting from a place of fluidity and acceptance of ourselves and others. Interesting stuff.
It is, Ken. And one final plea. If you have a client who is defensive, honor those defenses. Go gently. Those defense mechanisms will have kept them surviving in the world. They're like a life raft on a bobbing sea of incongruence. And honor those defenses. Don't deflate the life raft. Because the analogy is that someone can be on a sea in a very poorly constructed boat, but they're still above the water. and if you start to kind of deflate or put holes in their self-concept, they may very well sink. So honor the defenses, be patient, and just watch the UPR. Just be non-judgmental and just see what happens. It's amazing.
It is. A question comes up for me as you're saying that, Rory. So you went into this topic saying, when we see these defenses, how do we work with that? Do we challenge them? And I guess what you're saying there is, if there is challenge to be had, it needs to be gentle challenge, and that it is about the client finding their own way around their own defenses, not our job as counselors to show them the way around or to tell them how to do it or to point out what those defenses are, but for the client in that threat-free environment with maybe gentle challenge, with reflection back of what they're saying, pointing to the incongruence, finding their own way. Oh, I love therapy talk. We could go on all day, Rory.
We could. Very well put, Ken. We could go on all day about it, but you'll find defense mechanisms and defenses, and as Rogers called it, incongruence, a lot in the therapy room. Be gentle, be kind, be patient.